Hey G, let's roll 'em.
Welcome to Questions and Alan. And here he is on camera, our very own Alan.
Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg, and I'm here to help you with designing and developing for the Google Assistant, answering your questions, solving your problems, and helping you do better stuff with it. So, what's the word around town, G?
This change has confused quite a few people. How are lists and carousels supported in the Actions Builder?
It's a good question because things have changed. The first thing that's changed is that we refer to it as a collection now, not a carousel anymore. So we have lists and collections, not lists and carousels. The second, and this is a pretty big conceptual change, but in a lot of ways it doesn't change all that much, is that instead of treating things as an event like we did in the previous version of Actions on Google and with Dialogflow, we're now treating them as an actual type. So instead of having to worry about how they're being handled, we're going to be treating them just like we treat other types in the new Actions Builder.
So, what are the implications of making it a type instead?
So I think the biggest implication is that this is really more of a voice first approach to things. We're acknowledging the fact that we are dealing with it as audio, that the primary input is going to be audio, and then any visual components have to kind of work along with this audio to kind of to work in sync, so that it's audio first, it's voice first, but that there may be this visual component as well, and that we're adding this visual component to what we've normally treated as a purely audio thing, as a type and the aliases that go along with the entity type. Now, in addition to having the audio, these words, there's also some visual parts that go along with it. And I think that's an interesting implication of how we get to deal with it.
That sounds like it makes a lot of sense. But how do we set the visual component?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense, certainly. I think, it's a very clever approach to the whole thing. The first thing that we need to make sure that we've done is that in the Actions Builder, we need to make sure that we're going to have a type. Because what we will be doing in our webhook is overriding or supplementing this type with the display information that we're going to want to have to it. Or we can just override it, create a bunch of new entities and aliases for this type, along with the display information that goes along with it. And we would normally be doing that as part of what we refer to as a session type or a session entity. Then, again in our webhook, what we'll be doing is we'll be sending back the fact that we want this rich display of either a list or a carousel, but then we just reference this type, and we reference the values in the type. So there's no additional information that we need to provide. We're just kind of referencing something that we've already had to build through it.
Okay, but do we need to do anything in the Actions Builder?
Well, yes. As I said, we need to define the type first, because as part of a session type, you don't create a new type. You're overriding and supplementing values in it. So the first thing we need to do is to define a type. Then, when we have a scene where we're going to be presenting this list or menu, I think of it as a menu sometimes, we're going to need a slot that will fill in the result. When we prompt for this slot, that's when we're going to trigger the webhook that sends back the session entity and the list or collection part. And then, of course, we need to process this slot. But the beauty of this is that we're processing this slot the same way we process any other slot. So we're just going to be looking at the slot, usually in a webhook, and examining the values. We don't need to do anything special for a list or a carousel at this point. It's just treated like every other slot, like every other value we have in the system. And I think that's what's so great about this, is that it works just as well voice first, voice only, as well as if we're giving it this additional display information. How we handle it ends up being exactly the same. And that's what's pretty wonderful about this. So, does all of that make sense?
For an overview, sure. And details are at developers.google.com/assistant. Say good night, Alan.
Good night, Alan.